I'm not ashamed.
Did Moses' prayer in Exodus 5:22 show his impatience or displeasure with God? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus on Walking Through the Bible.
Glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Exodus chapter 5. We're going to be reading from verses 20 to 23. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Exodus chapter 5, beginning at verse 20. Then as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, Let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it that you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all. In our last episode, we have the officers of the children of Israel standing before Pharaoh. They complain that his demands that the children of Israel's brick quota remain unchanged, despite now having to gather their own straw, is unreasonable. The Pharaoh of Egypt rejects their complaints, saying that it was because they were lazy and desired to go out and worship their God in the wilderness that these demands were placed on them. That didn't change the fact that Pharaoh's demands were unreasonable, but it did clarify why Pharaoh made his demands. Knowing that Pharaoh wasn't going to change his mind, the officers left. Along the way, they met Moses and Aaron. What they basically tell Moses and Aaron is, look what you've done. By telling Pharaoh to let us go worship God in the wilderness, you've caused Pharaoh to get angry and to call us lazy, to the point that he is close to wanting to kill us. They call upon the Lord to look upon Moses and Aaron to judge them for their actions. This despite the fact that Moses had relayed to them in chapter 4 all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses. My, how our heart and disposition changes when we face hardship. At the end of chapter 4, the children of Israel worshiped God for hearing their cries. They were probably expecting to be released from slavery almost immediately, but when their lives got tougher, they blamed Moses, God's prophet, for even coming to them in the first place. They should have trusted in God to deliver them, even if they didn't understand how. We'll get God's reasoning again for why he allowed such a hardship to fall upon his people in chapter 6. Moses heard the cries of the children of Israel and therefore returned to the Lord. We don't know if Moses had a special place where he talked to God, like he did at Mount Sinai, or whether this was a common prayer to God, but Moses brought their case before the Lord. He asked the Lord, Why have you brought trouble on this people? Now it should be said that the Lord didn't personally bring this evil upon the people, for James 1:13 says that God does not cause people to sin, which is what Pharaoh was doing. However, the Lord allows people to respond or not respond to his voice, and he does use the sins of others to accomplish his purpose. There was sin to go around when it came to the crucifixion of Jesus, but God used that sin to save mankind from sin. There was the sin of Judas that got Jesus arrested. There was the sin of the Jewish Sanhedrin in convicting an innocent man. There was the sin of Pilate in sentencing an innocent man. All of these were sins that led to Jesus' death, and God didn't cause any of them, but he used them to accomplish his purpose. When God requested through Moses for Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go into the wilderness to worship him, this was not a sinful request, nor was it a temptation for Pharaoh to sin. It was, however, God testing his heart, a test that he failed miserably on. And God knew that he would because he knew Pharaoh's heart. If God knew that Pharaoh would fail, why did he test him? To teach Israel to trust him, for he would prove his power to them, and then to prove to the nations who the true God of this universe was. From our perspective, God was the reason that the children of Israel were being afflicted, for if he hadn't made the request, the children of Israel wouldn't have been treated so harshly in this way. I would like to point out, though, we have no idea what Pharaoh would have done later on in the future, regardless of God's request, for he was already treating them harshly to begin with. So yes, even though God tested Pharaoh, and Pharaoh used that test as an excuse to further oppress Israel, Pharaoh was at fault for Israel's oppression, even though God allowed it. Moses then goes on to ask God why he had sent him, for since he came to Egypt, Pharaoh had done even more evil to this people, and God still hadn't delivered them. Some might think that Moses is getting impatient with God or is displeased with him. But let's remember One of Moses' tasks is to act as a mediator between Israel and God. He is presenting the pleas of the children of Israel before God and calling on God to act. The children of Israel thought that God was afflicting them. The children of Israel thought that Moses had caused more trouble, and the children of Israel were the ones feeling abandoned by God because of the fact he hadn't delivered them yet. Moses was simply presenting their case. He wasn't being impatient here, nor was he displeased, for he knew his mission. The way we can know that Moses wasn't complaining to God for his inaction is by reading God's reaction in chapter 6. God wasn't angry with Moses, as he was in chapter 4, but simply explained to Moses his plans and told him to go tell the children of Israel what they were. God hears the cries of his people and will answer their prayers if we put our faith and trust in him. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Exodus chapter 6, verses 1 to 9, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.